Hi, everybody. My name's Arwyn.
And I'm Dylan.
And we are the founders of Lar Bar Club, which is a writing club in Portland, Maine. And every week we make a video where we talk about something involving writing or the writing process. So this week we're going to be talking about how...
The writing process.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out a different way to say that, but I literally just gave it away already. So
it's okay. We're not really about suspense in this video because we tell it like it is 100% of the time. We're not holding anything back here. You're getting all of it.
Yeah, neither one of us are suspense writers. I'll just put that out there.
Absolutely. So if you are, get out of here. You're not welcome in this podcast, video series.
It's not a podcast.
TV show.
It's gone off the rails. Anyone's welcome. So there are a lot of different methods to write, and so I kind of wanted to take this week to talk about what some of those methods are, what my personal method is. He's probably going to go on about what he does.
Inevitably.
It's kind of weird, but, you know, that's fine, because everyone's process is really good. So there's a lot of different ways to write, obviously. Some people, so I write like full-length novels, right? I used to write poetry, and those processes looked really different for me. So I want to talk about my process around full-length novels, and then if we have time, I'll talk about my poetry process. But
do you want to go over some of the basics of what a productive writing process looks like, what it allows you to accomplish?
Yeah, so I went through a lot of like attempts at writing novels before I actually finished one. So I had to figure out like what worked for me. And for me, I would say a successful writing process is one where you finish what you want to finish.
Right.
And you're relatively happy with what you finish. I know my first drafts, I'm not really happy with them ever, but at least they're done. And then I have my like editing process, which we can talk about in a different video, which is my favorite process, because editing is way more fun to me than writing. I don't know what that says to me about me as a writer, but that's a thing.
Hey.
So I used to just try to like write a novel and not really like do anything beyond just like sitting down and writing, which apparently is called being a pantser. I don't quite know that vocabulary, but I've heard this being used where you just like go for it. And some people this works really well. For me, it does not. So I am a planner. And how I do that is I write timelines. And I have found timelines to be very, very helpful because when I'm having like some sort of writer's block, I can just be like, I just have to write this scene. That's all I have to do. I don't even have to like come up with what happens next. I literally just have to write this scene. And that keeps me going.
Like you write out what happens in the scene or?
Yeah, so like the timeline, I have like this separate journal. It's called my timeline journal.
Right.
And I don't think anyone would really understand it but me.
Well, right.
Because it's just like
for you.
Yeah, and I like number each scene. So it's like number 1 is like character does this.
Right.
And then like if there's any dialogue that I've thought of, I'll like write down the dialogue.
Right.
So sometimes it'll just be like the rose scene, line of dialogue, so-and-so dies. And that's like the whole thing. But like I know what that means.
Right, but you just try,
you
try to reduce it to like the smallest like nugget that you can.
Exactly.
So you can come back to it to flesh it out later.
Yeah, because the actual writing for me is the fleshing it out.
Right.
So I'll write, so my timelines are kind of nonsensical. They're very simplistic, and it's really just like plotting out every single scene so I know like point A to point B to point C to D to Finn, you know, like I can understand how it goes, and that like helps with like plot holes because I can see the plot holes before I actually spend a bunch of time writing them, which is helpful. And so when I go to the like writing block, so to say, I have this idea of what's going to happen, and I've already worked out the plot issues.
Right. Yeah.
Because for me, I imagine stories in like kind of these theatrical movie clips.
Yeah.
And I don't always understand how my characters get from like one point to another point.
Like the basic mechanics of like, oh, Bill walked over to the convenience store.
Yes.
With a gun. It's
and so like I have this big theatrical like A scene and this big theatrical B scene, but I can't just like write them together because like there's no build up, there's no like you know. So the timeline is really helpful to me to like force myself to do that work. And the timeline is definitely work. I don't 100% enjoy the timeline.
Right.
I enjoy the writing, but
right, and the editing, but
and the editing a lot. I love editing. So that's how I write. I write the timeline, and then I write the first draft. And usually the first draft, there are times when I'm like writing a scene that it's just like very bare bones because I just want to get it out.
Right.
and then I like flesh it out, I think.
Right.
Later, and that is helpful for me because sometimes I don't want to write a scene. I want to write a different scene, but I have to like force myself to write the scene and that's next to my timeline. So I just write this like super basic, like kind of rudimentary scene, and then later when I'm feeling up for it, I'll go in and like sculpt it a little bit. Or so I am also one that does a lot of revisions. I don't
which I think would be hopefully go for everyone. Right?
Yeah. I know there's definitely some writers where their first draft is like way more coherent than my first draft.
Right. I mean,
but
I think for you I think the process is more about generation, like creating scenes, creating characters, having the basic mechanics of the story in place, and then it's a paring down process. So the goal is to have the most volume in the first draft, and then everything else comes down and it becomes more refined, which I support, because I think as your editor I support it, because I think it's harder to go the other way and add things on that are missing. I would much rather have a large block to deal with in the editing phase, and then we can chop this out, whatever. That I think is much more lends itself to a more cohesive product at the end, as opposed to amending or appending things that
or like fixing a plot issue.
Well, right, exactly.
I've had that happen before. I did timelines where there'd be like a massive plot issue, and I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, like there's 200 pages."
Well, right, and then you have to
useless to me now.
Well, so it's just like economy of time, because like writing is hard, and like writing takes. I think people romanticize the idea a lot, but the mechanics of like sitting down and writing something that is worthwhile for that length of time is very challenging. So anything that you can do to prevent wasted energy and wasted work is going to increase your chances of actually finishing the work, because otherwise you're just going to get bummed out. And
like what would happen is I would encounter these plot issues while I was like really deep in like a handwritten like novel, and I would just like not lose interest, but just give up. I'd be like, well, like,
at this point, it's like
not worth. That's not like it's not worth it, but it kind of was. Like I just like would get really overwhelmed. So this is why timelines are super helpful to me. But I know a lot of people where they don't need timelines. So I'm not at all saying like you have to do this in order to finish. This is just like for someone like me who didn't even know what a timeline was until I was like 19 or 20. Hashtag public schools. But I just want to put that idea out there. So if anyone's struggling, and if anyone's like, why am I like writing this novel and it's not working, like maybe try that. But if you're someone that can sit down and write a novel, like do it. Go for it. This is just a video for people that are struggling.
Right, and this thing is like, I think you look at the results. Like if you're writing something that you are happy with, that is getting good feedback, continue doing that. That's the obvious thing. Don't switch it up. But if you are not happy with what's coming out, I think it's probably the exception more than the rule that someone that's able to sit down and produce a cohesive work without any sort of forethought or planning, explicit planning on paper to write things out. Because I think that if you're able to do that, that's awesome. But if you're not happy with the quality of your work, you're not happy, it's not getting the kind of feedback that you expect or you would like, try the timeline. Try something more concrete.
Try something different.
Blueprint.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So now you're writing, which...
Yeah, I mean, it depends on like what style you're writing, because I have transitioned from writing poetry into writing longer works, and I've adopted some of the techniques that you use, because my techniques that I use for writing poetry, for instance, are not conducive, I think, to producing coherent narrative. It's much more about the visceral side of it, and a lot of that involves trying to take as much away as possible, to try to tune out as much as much of your own thinking as possible. The things I know that there's some people that sit down and will try to craft a sentence and choose each word very deliberately. And to me, that's always sort of, when I have attempted to do that, it has always come out as inauthentic. It's come out as, arrogant, and, it just has not represented the quality that I would expect from myself. So my process for writing poetry is to, essentially open myself up to as much, to quiet things down as much and get out of my own head, to try to take a step back and receive things that come to me. I like to often put headphones on and like the same song over and over and over again, and basically meditate or think about an image, or 10-second or like a 3-second video clip, you know, like whether a real video clip or something that you've envisioned in your mind. Like I once was thinking of like a dancing skeleton for some reason. And when the poem came out, it had nothing to do with a dancing skeleton. It was just, it's almost like the idea of, you know, a mantra, keeping your mind focused on something so that you can shut down all the things that get in the way of receiving or generating or discovering genuine writing and genuine quality writing. So the thing is, I think that is challenging in its own set of ways, because it's not like you're sitting there with a furrowed brow, like trying to, I can't think of this word, because, you know, it's really the opposite. You try to get as far away from it as possible. You step back out of yourself as much as possible, and you never have to think about the right word, because you'll receive it as an entire phrase. You'll receive it as a sentence. It'll come to you fully formed, but to get to the point where it's quiet enough that you can hear it is the challenging part, because we use language all the time, every day, for a multitude of reasons. You know, it's like the same mechanical tools that I'm using to go talk to, you know, a bank teller or to write out a receipt or whatever are the same tools I would need to use to write poetry. So you need to have your brain sort of shift and get away from the expectations of how you use language. You need to get into that place, which is on its own challenging, I think.
Yeah. And well, one thing about your work that I've always noticed is that it's very intuitive. Like there's not a lot of a narrative aspect to it, which is why I think it's successful as a poem.
Right.
Because it kind of gets away from like, this is what I'm trying to say. It's more just like, here is these like visceral images and phrases that I'm going to like present.
Right. And I think you, at its best, I have no idea what's happening. You know, like that's, I think the best is because I have sort of pushed I have as little idea what's going on as the reader, and it's sort of a discovery process, reading the poem, writing the poem, understanding it. It's this idea that if I can tell you what my poem is about, then I'm just going to tell you in as plain as language as possible. I don't want my poem to be able to be translatable. I don't want you to be able to say, oh, this is what he's talking about, because to me, that's just, a poem is not a cipher that you run an idea through and then you encode it into something that's a puzzle for somebody.
Yeah.
Like, I think it should be at the frontier of your understanding, and you present that in as honest a way as you can to your readers. And the only way that I can get there is by quieting down, getting to, this almost meditative state.
Yeah.
So that's
a better poet than I am. I'm just like confessional narrative poems where I'm like, let me just list all of my like thoughts, like 1, 2, 3, 4, boom, it's a poem. But that's a valid form of poetry. But one thing I do admire about your poem is that it does have that quality, which is why I wanted you to talk a little bit about how you get there.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that if you're finding that your poetry doesn't have that element of honesty, that doesn't have that element of like a visceral, experiential flavor to it, try that. Try not thinking about it. Try not writing a poem, and just sit in that space with a pad of paper and like think about a dancing skeleton, and
then write a poem about like your childhood trauma. Like it'd be like boom.
You're the filter through which these things pass. You're gonna imbue whatever you receive with characteristics that are personal to you.
Yeah.
So whatever comes out is going to be different. You're not going to write the same stuff that I would or anybody else.
That's true. That is very true.
But I think the moral of the story is just
figure out what works for you.
Try a lot of different things if you're not happy with the quality of your work, because this is a trial and error. So I wrote a lot of crappy I still write a lot of crappy poetry, but no.
Lies.
No, definitely not lies. But don't be afraid to strike out and try something new, because there's no right way to write.
Yeah, and talk to if you have anyone else that writes in your life, or if you are part of like a Twitter community or something like that, like talk to the people there and just be like, what do you do to write?
I think I'd like to have more writers having that conversation, because I think there's this level of mystery, and it's like there's no reason to withhold that from the community. Like if you discover something that works for you, it's like maybe that's what somebody else is missing, and it'll click in their brain and they'll be in.
Yeah, totally. Like for me, I struggled so much just trying to write novels without any sort of planning, and it wasn't until like learning that was something people did that I could then move forward. And now I've written
27 novels.
That's
and it's outrageous, and they're all good.
4.
Oh, just casual 4 novels. It's fine. Don't worry about it. I can't write like 4 pages, and you have 18 novels. It's just.
we just write at different rates. It's fine, Dylan. We're all valid here. We're all valid writers.
Our club says that you are valid. Remember that.
Yeah, hashtag you're valid.
It's true.
So talk to people, figure out what they've done. If you're stuck on something, switch it up, try something new. Listen to the same song 20 times in a row while writing things, or not, or write in silence, or write listening to Linkin Park's Meteora. Just maybe somebody does that here, maybe.
Perfect.
So do that. Just like figure it out and experiment, and don't be scared. Like I feel like there's a lot of fear around writing, and it's like a lot of fear around I need it to be good immediately, or I need to do it this way. Yeah, it's never good immediately. Or like if I don't do it this way, I'm not a real writer, and that's like all that's false. Like all that's just a bunch of ego of like people needing to pretend like they're better than the rest of us. But really just like settle into like what's good for you and what's comfortable for you and what works, because that's important. And you're a writer no matter how you're writing or what you're writing. As long as you're, doing what's important to you and communicating what you need to communicate, that's what's important, no matter what. So
if you have any idea, anything you like to do to write, leave it down in the comment section. Let us know. Write, email, anything like that. Subscribe if you want to see more videos.
Yep, every Sunday we'll be here.
Absolutely. Thank you for watching. Hope this was useful to you. Yeah. And go out there and write some stuff.